Racist gang attacks. Black woman, unaware. Her dogs are ex-military. They're a neighborhood so quiet that evil doesn't need to scream. It only needs to whisper, and people will pretend they didn't hear a thing. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. That afternoon, the Missouri sky turned golden, sunlight spreading like melted resin across every cracked slab of pavement. Bella Lewis, a 38-year-old black woman, was walking two German shepherds silently past rows of single-story houses painted white, with brown shingled roofs. Ekko and Valor, two four-legged veterans, needed no leash. They kept perfectly to her left, matching her pace and distance like ghosts trained on the battlefield. Only a few in the neighborhood knew her name. Most didn't care to. To them, she was the black woman with big dogs, both unfamiliar and unsettling. She had moved in from Kansas City, purchasing house number 427, with savings from 12 years in the United States Marine Corps, where she once led a K-9 unit in Fallujah, diffused explosives in Kandahar, and fought beside soldiers in Helmand, Afghanistan. 82 days had passed since she moved in. No welcome greetings, no neighbor's pie, no new resident meet and greet as promised on the flyers, only peering eyes behind curtains and whispers disguised as idle chatter. Those dogs look like they're trained to attack. She used to be military? Then why is she living alone? Someone like that living near an elementary school. I'm not so sure. Bella didn't pay it any mind. She hadn't come to be liked. She came to be left alone. But peace, in places like this, wasn't safety. It was a white coat of paint, covering fractures in the earth beneath. As she and Valor and Ekko turned the corner, where maple trees had begun to shed their leaves, Ekko let out a low growl. Not a bark, just a sound. But to Bella, it was as clear as an alarm. His ears stood up, eyes fixed toward a bush where a shadow shifted. Valor reacted instantly, slowed his steps, lowered his body, shifted his weight to the hind legs. Perfect attack posture. Bella didn't need to speak. A slight tilt of her head, and the dogs broke formation. Ekko veered left, circling the bush. Valor hugged the sidewalk to the right, a staggered approach, the very technique Bella had once used approaching a Taliban hideout in 2012. Then she heard laughter. Not loud, but tight and coarse enough to turn the warm sunlight into something hostile. It was a familiar laugh, rough, mocking, laced with cheap beer and baseless arrogance. She walked a few more steps, then stopped. Roughly 20 meters ahead, 4 white men stood around a woman. She looked to be in her mid-30s, curly-haired, wearing a dusty white blouse. Standing beside a gray sedan, she was nearly pinned between the bulk of one man and the car itself. Bella didn't need to look long. She knew this type, men who believed they had control simply because they were bigger, louder, and had skin that fit in better around here. She'd seen their kind in Fallujah. The only difference was the language. There, they spoke Arabic. Here, they wore flannel shirts and sunglasses. But the arrogance was the same. She exhaled slowly. The smell of dry grass, motor oil, and fear clung to the air. Valor turned his head and glanced at her. She nodded. The fight hadn't begun. But evil had revealed its face. And this time, it had chosen the wrong person to surround. Some people walk into danger without realizing they've crossed the final line of arrogance. And some, in their brief thirst for power, will learn an expensive lesson, delivered by the precise bite of a combat-trained dog that was raised to survive through gunfire and bombs. The group of 4 white men surrounding O'Reilly moved with a coordination too deliberate to be called coincidence. No one touched her, not a single direct threat. But the menace was clear in their subtle actions, the way their steps closed in, the way their eyes held her down, the low chuckles dragging out silence on purpose. Oralee, a black woman in her 30s, an insurance worker on her way home after an 11-hour shift, only wanted to start her sedan and leave. But instead, she was being held in place by strangers who wore the label neighbors, though no one knew where they came from. One wore a jacket that read Iron Sons, a group previously reported for ties to a far-right militia in Illinois. Bella Lewis approached, not rushing. She didn't yell, didn't call for help, just placed her left hand gently on Valor's chest, her right palm lowered to thigh level, a signal for absolute silence. Meanwhile, Ekko continued his arc-shaped movement to the left, closing the radius in a perfect level 2 tactical maneuver. "I would advise you to take 3 steps back," Bella said, her voice calm, colder than the early autumn breeze slipping past the crimson maple bushes. A man nearly 6 feet tall, shaved head, a leather wristband, curled his lips in a smirk. "Oh, another black lady here to teach us manners?" another chimed in. "These dogs got licenses? Or are they just your little war toys for show?" Bella didn't respond. She tilted her head slightly to the left. Valor let out a low growl, barely audible, but unmistakable to anyone who'd heard that sound on the battlefield. Oralee flinched, her eyes shimmering with a fear that had been suppressed too long. One of the men stepped forward and tapped Oralee's shirt button lightly with a finger. His voice reeked of gasoline and cigarette smoke. "Or maybe you like the attention, huh?" That was the moment Bella stepped fully into the circle, her stance locked into the pavement. No worry, no sign of fear. She simply said 6 words, clear, cold, exact. "Take 3 steps back." Right now. Silence. A third man, younger, but with eyes full of calculation, pulled out a switchblade from the back pocket of his jeans. The blade flipped open, catching the last light of the fading sun. He spun it between his fingers like a game, not realizing he'd just triggered a scene he couldn't control. Bella didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. It was just a whisper, like breath against an ear. "Ekko." And the world shifted. Ekko launched from behind the bush, a compact form like a programmed bullet. The dog leapt, jaws locking onto the flesh just beneath the man's right elbow. The sound wasn't a bark. It was the sound of skin tearing. The knife dropped, spinning 3 times before clinking sharply against the pavement, a metallic period at the end of the sentence. Blood began to drip, soaking into the concrete at the heart of the street. The man with the blade screamed. The whole group recoiled on instinct. Valor remained still. Only Ekko had moved, a perfect warning strike, just enough to send the message. This is not a woman alone. This is the commander of 2 4-legged warriors, and everyone here is playing by the wrong rules. The man who'd been bitten dropped to his knees, clutching his bleeding arm, his face twisted in pain. The other 3 stood frozen. Their mockery had vanished. In its place was something Bella had seen years ago in Helmand. Real fear. She didn't laugh, didn't sneer. She turned to Oralee and asked gently, "Are you okay?" Oralee nodded, lips trembling, both hands clutching her purse, eyes glistening with tears she wasn't yet willing to let fall. She wasn't used to being protected, and for the first time, she was shielded without having to scream for it. Bella looked at the remaining men. "Remember this feeling," she said slowly. "Because next time, there won't be a warning." And the world kept spinning, but it would never spin the same again. The man with the bite on his arm writhed on the ground, face pale, trying to scream between gasping breaths. "Are you insane? Do you even know what you just did?" But his voice was nothing more than the faint echo of defeat. In his eyes now, there was no arrogance left, only fear. Fear of a black woman who didn't bow her head. Fear of two silent creatures as precise as battlefield weapons. Bella didn't bother replying. She wasn't the kind to use words as tools. Instead, she raised 2 fingers, signaling Valor to sweep right and press in on the man standing near the rear of the car. Ekko still held his teeth, lightly clamped on the injured man's arm, not digging deeper, not letting go. It was total control. No violence needed, only the clear message that the other side had already lost command. Another man, broad-shouldered, scarred face, a baseball bat bag slung over his back, quietly moved toward Bella from behind, attempting a surprise punch. But he didn't understand that to someone who once participated in a hostage rescue mission in Kunduz, Afghanistan, the sound of pounding footsteps on concrete was louder than the rotor blades of a UH-60 Blackhawk. Bella dodged the punch in a split second, twisted at the hips, and bent his arm backward. Her shoulder lock was lightning fast, precise as Krav Maga close combat technique. With a simple twist of the wrist, his shoulder joint let out a chilling crack. The man screamed, a shrill, helpless cry like a child robbed of control over his own body. His legs buckled, his mouth twisted, his eyes flooded with pain. By then, Valor had already cornered the third man, the one in the leather jacket, the biggest of the group, forcing him back toward the rear of the car. The dog didn't need to bite. Just standing there, growling low in his throat, eyes razor sharp, was enough to make the man shrink back, spine pressed to the trunk, hands falling useless at his sides. Orally was still rooted to the same spot. The phone in her hand trembled violently, but her fingers couldn't press a single button. She had never seen anything like this. Not in action movies, not in dreams. This was real, and it was happening just 4 steps from her street. "Call the police," Bella said without turning. "But they won't believe you." The words were soft, almost emotionless, but they struck deeper into Orly's chest than any advice ever could. She understood. Even if she called, even if she screamed, the questions would be about her background, why she was there. Not about the 4 men who had just tried to intimidate her with invisible power handed down by the system. The 2 remaining men, one lanky with a steel baton in hand, the other small but with razor eyes, stood frozen. They didn't charge. They didn't flee. They were paralyzed by something they couldn't name. One of them whispered, voice unsteady, "She's military. She used to be military." But it was too late. They didn't know. Bella had once commanded a K-9 unit in Ghazni, had coordinated 12 military dogs simultaneously in 115-degree heat, had disarmed 3 IEDs in a row under gunfire to save 2 wounded teammates. On the battlefield, hesitation was the enemy. Here, she moved with the same rule. A cold wind swept through, carrying with it the groans, the low growls, and the panic now creeping into the eyes of the men who once thought they owned this block. Bella lowered her shoulders, eyes fixed on them, not angry, not threatening, just a statement of fact. This isn't a park. This isn't a neighborhood. To M, this is a battlefield, and you chose the wrong side. Silence blanketed everything. Less than 10 minutes after the screaming echoed through the corner of the street, flashing red and blue lights tore through the descending dusk. The sound of sirens didn't bring a sense of rescue. It signaled that a system was arriving, not to investigate, but to determine. Not to listen, but to conclude. A Tannersville County Police Department SUV skidded to a halt at the curb, followed by an animal control vehicle. 3 officers stepped out. Leading them was Sergeant Roy Mays, a tall white man in his 50s, silver mustache, with eyes that looked at black people as if they'd just stepped out of a criminal indictment. Before anyone could speak, The man Ekko had bitten lunged forward, blood smeared across his mouth, but hatred in his voice. "She set her dogs on me. We were just talking, no threats or anything." Bella stood still. Ekko and Valor remained in their positions like combat statues. No growling, no movement, only their eyes, locked in, tracking every vein bulging in the wrists of the men who had just fabricated their version of the truth. Aurelie stepped forward, trembling but clear, phone still recording in her hand. "They surrounded me," she said. "She saved me. She didn't attack first. They had a knife." But Sergeant Mays didn't look at her. He didn't ask a question. He didn't request to see the video. He just looked at Bella and asked one thing. "Have you ever been arrested?" Bella raised her head, eyes unblinking. "No," she answered firmly. "But if I'm arrested today, it won't be because I was wrong." No commentary. No notes taken. The other two officers, both white, quietly approached her and pulled out handcuffs. Bella didn't resist. She held out her hands, palms facing the sky. She had done this gesture hundreds of times in conflict zones, proving she carried no weapons at chaotic military checkpoints. The cold steel clamped around her wrists, but the greater pain came as she watched Ekko and Valor being dragged away on leashes by animal control. No tail wags, no sounds. Just Ekko's final glance back, eyes asking one silent question. "Where's the order? Are we pulling back?" Aurelie screamed. "You don't understand the situation. They were going to hurt me. She saved me." Sergeant Mays turned, face blank. "We've heard enough. Ma'am, you can go home. We'll handle the rest." Bella was pushed into the back seat of the cruiser, her knee tapping lightly against the metal door. She said nothing. On the ride, she looked out the window. 2-story homes, still glowing with warm lights, curtains half drawn, no doors opening. They had seen everything. But like always, no one wanted to get involved. She didn't need them to testify. But their silence was testimony. At the station, the report was written quickly. 2 of the 4 men, still bandaged, signed a pre-drafted statement. It didn't mention the switchblade. It didn't mention the encirclement. No detail referenced the threats. Everything centered on a black woman unable to control her dogs and unprovoked, aggressive behavior. Aurelie waited outside the police station for over 2 hours, hoping to be called in to give her statement. But no one opened the door. No one asked. No one acknowledged the video on her phone, footage that clearly showed Bella defending, not attacking. Because the truth, if it doesn't fit the system, gets discarded. And in that system, they don't need an investigation. Only a script. 18 hours. That wasn't just the amount of time Bella Lewis was held in a freezing holding cell, with no phone, no lawyer, and no explanation beyond 3 words, standard procedure, but also enough time for the system to twist every truth into a narrative it could control. In the intake records of the Tannersville holding facility, the reason for arrest section read clearly, "Use of dangerous animals in a residential area, unprovoked attack." Attached were photos of Ekko and Valor, 2 German shepherds with piercing stares, captioned, "Dogs trained for tactical assault, exhibit uncontrolled response towards strangers." No one asked about Bella's military background. No one checked the federal personnel system, where a single ID lookup would reveal Staff Sergeant Bella Lewis, United States Marine Corps, 12 years of service, 3 combat deployments, a combat action ribbon, and a distinguished service commendation from the Department of Defense for leading the K-9 unit in Operation Hammer Dust in Helmand, where she once saved 7 Marines from a hidden minefield using only Ekko and an old metal detector. It was Officer Ames, the night duty officer that evening, who first read through the entire file instead of skimming the photos. the only one who noticed that Bella had the right to a phone call after the 3rd hour, but had never been informed. He reviewed the accompanying body cam footage. The sequence was clear, right up to the moment Bella stood in the street and ordered her dogs to disengage. Then, a black screen. A crude edit, precisely at the moment Bella was handcuffed. Ames frowned. He wasn't unfamiliar with accidental data loss. He'd seen it twice before, both times in cases involving black individuals and accusations from the so-called elite minority white residents of the town. At 5:42 p.m. the following day, Aurelie returned to the station. This time, she brought not just words, but proof. In her hand was a silver USB drive containing an audio recording from the phone she'd discreetly activated the moment she was surrounded the previous day. "Listen to this," she said to Officer Ames as she opened the audio file. The man's voice rang out clearly. "Girls like you think you can stroll around with dogs like it's a war zone. You need to know your place." Another voice chimed in, laughing. "If we lay a hand on you, who do you think they'll believe?" Ames clenched his jaw. In that moment, he understood. Without the recording, no one would have believed her. Without a white woman, Aurelie, determined enough to walk into the evidence room, Bella would have remained the out-of-control black woman, not a decorated veteran protecting a citizen. Thanks to Aurelie's intervention, Bella was released on bail later that afternoon. She exited through the back door of the station without saying a word, but her gaze was steady, her spine unbent, her footsteps as composed as when stepping out of a military base. Back at house number 427, Bella quietly unlocked the door. In the living room, light from the old lamp cast soft shadows across the floor. On the wall hung a neatly coiled leash, untouched, and her Marpat camouflage uniform, clean and pressed, with the nameplate Lewis still intact. She walked to the whiteboard near the dining table, erased the old text, and wrote 2 new lines with a marker. Ekko, processing. Valor, tracking. A soldier does not abandon their unit, and to her, Ekko and Valor weren't just dogs. They were comrades. The left side of Bella's face was slightly swollen, a small cut from when the cuffs were yanked during her arrest. She looked in the mirror, then refused to cover it. She left it bare, let it sting, not out of weakness, but remembrance. A reminder that this time, she wasn't just fighting to protect. She was fighting to expose the entire system that chose a liar over a soldier. Nightfall. In the outskirts of Tannersville carried a thick, suffocating silence, as if every sound was swallowed by the dark ridges of trees encircling the town. But in house number 427, there was no sleep that night. Bella Lewis was no longer just the woman who had spent nearly a day in unlawful custody. She had returned to the form the system tried to ignore, a warrior with a spirit that never yields. At exactly 12:08 a.m., she turned on the light in the backyard bunker. Every iron hook, every yellowed wooden drawer was opened. A tan Mole tactical harness was pulled down and methodically reassembled with a throat mic, close-range tracking system, infrared camera, and a flyer thermal scope, each piece of equipment she had once used in night raids against insurgents in Helmand. She latched each component into place as though preparing for a breach operation. No music, no prayers, only steady breath and absolute focus. After checking the batteries and syncing the tracker, Bella picked up an old phone, military-grade encryption, and scrolled to the only contact in her list without a number. Torch 5. The call lasted less than 20 seconds. No greetings, no explanations. Just 4 words. "I need Silas Brewer's file." Torch 5 didn't ask why. He simply replied with a single brief disconnect tone. 2 hours. Bella hung up. While she waited, she entered the storage room and opened her encrypted laptop. On screen, a digital satellite map appeared. western forest zones of Tannersville, an area once marked X9 Suspicious Transfer Point in a domestic extremism file she had studied while working with Northern Command. At nearly 2:15 a.m., the encrypted email arrived. The file opened in silence, 17 pages of documentation. Silas Brewer, 42 years old. Former military contractor, dishonorably discharged in 2013 after being caught transferring unregistered firearms at a Nevada training camp. Tied to 2 disappearances, including an independent journalist and a transitioning service member. Both investigations were dropped due to a lack of physical evidence. Most notably, Silas had once been monitored by the FBI for allegedly running a white supremacist militia group under the guise of an abandoned sawmill 10 miles northwest of Tannersville, an area listed on the 2019 Domestic Homeland Security Risk Zones. Bella zoomed in on the map, marked transport routes and forest paths. She donned a simple ghillie camouflage jacket and left the house that very night, recon gear in tow. Her shadow slipped through oak woods, weaving between damp roots. She didn't need a flashlight. She read the wind's direction through the rustle of leaves. As she neared the mill, she lay prone, using the thermal scope to identify. 3 men posted at the gate, 4 more inside in a meeting. 3 nights later, she infiltrated the area. While Brewer's group held their meeting, she planted a micro-recording device beneath a rotting wooden table, exactly where she once taught military trainees about acoustic dead zones. And what she captured was no longer suspicion. It was a confession. "We set an example with that black chick and her dogs," Silas's voice rang out on the recording, laced with arrogance. "The locals will understand. This game ain't made for them." Another voice replied, "Let the cops take care of this. Mays handles the legal part. We've got people inside now." Bella didn't rage. She didn't cry. She saved the data to 3 encrypted hard drives, each sent to an old military contact. People who, if one drive was destroyed, would ensure the other 2 reached defense media outlets. Meanwhile, Oralee had completed official certification paperwork for Valor and Ekko as formally trained K-9S of the United States Marine Corps. With that file, the Animal Control Unit had no grounds to keep them. The day Ekko and Valor were returned, they didn't wait for a call. They charged into Bella's arms as if the world had just been stitched back together. In the dim light of the trees, Bella refitted her earpiece and reattached the locator. She knelt and whispered, "We begin." And the 3 shadows vanished into the forest night, as if they had never belonged to this place. But this time, they didn't go on a scout. They returned to dismantle the system that dared drown justice in lies. In the suffocating space of the back cellar, beneath the harsh yellow light cast over the chipped wooden table, Bella Lewis sat still, back straight, eyes fixed on every word of the documents she had just collected from the abandoned sawmill. The air was thick with the scent of old metal, and the silence was so eerie that every keystroke on the keyboard sounded like gunfire in the night. Inside a rusted safe embedded deep within the brick wall, she had found not just evidence, but a doorway into a labyrinth of lies and crimes. A black leather-bound notebook, edges worn, filled by hand, phantom invoices, code sheets, and most strikingly, a list of encoded payments with entries like night patrol, $600, punishment, $1,200, quick cleanup, $3,500. But what made her breath slow wasn't the expenses. It was a single name written in red ink: Julio Ramirez, handled. Group exposure risk: Julio Ramirez, a 15-year-old brown-skinned boy who vanished without a trace in the summer of 2011, just 14 miles from Tannersville. The case had made the local papers before quickly fading into oblivion, like so many other children whose skin tone didn't align with the public's concern. Bella sent photos of the notebook to Officer Ames, the only person in the system who didn't yet seem rotten. Within 3 hours, Ames called back, his voice low but urgent. Julio was detained after an argument with Silas Brewer at the Hillridge gas station, a week before he disappeared. The report notes it clearly, but nothing was followed up. At the same time, Orally dug through old article folders, pieces that had been deleted from her independent blog after death threats. A post from 2012 included an interview with Julio's aunt. "I heard Brewer say the boy talked too much. Then he was gone." Bella decided to return to the disappearance site, a barren dirt path leading from the Hillridge gas station into Roper Forest. 3 miles in, she found a sign. "Private property. No trespassing." Its letters corroded as if by acid. Nearby, tire tracks etched deep into clay, clear enough to measure, matched the tread of a 2007 Ford truck, the same model Silas once owned. The following night, during a stakeout at a scrapyard in Jenkinstown, Bella intercepted one of the men involved in transport. His name was Craig Loden, 29, and his face turned ghost pale when she stepped out from the shadows. "You gonna kill me?" he stammered, still holding a half-smoked cigarette. "Not if you tell the truth," Bella replied, unblinking. Craig stuttered out. "I didn't hit anyone. I just drove. There's a list. Second drawer down, under the wooden desk at the mill." He swallowed hard, then backed into the night like someone who had just unloaded 12 years of guilt. Bella returned to the mill, this time not to investigate, but to retrieve proof. Inside the drawer of the wooden desk, she found a hardcover notebook, camouflaged beneath a 2015 calendar. Inside, 26 names. Most were young black men, a few of Latin descent. Beside each name was a lettered note. L reported to police. I had approached the media. N, no longer a threat. 5 names marked M, missing. 8 are labeled success threatened. At the bottom of the box, she found a printed copy of a text exchange between Officer Mays and Silas Brewer, extracted from the encrypted Signal app, time-stamped, with clear content. "Camera's been handled. Last segment cut as requested. Don't let her out. Working on a reason to hold the dogs longer." Bella duplicated all documents, encrypting them onto 3 iron key drives. She stored one in a hidden safe at home. The other 2 she mailed to 2 journalists, Marla Evans, who had once exposed a police mole case in Arkansas, and Kenzo Park, a war correspondent deported from Syria for uncovering a weapons trafficking network. In the final folder, she created a directory labeled Operation White Veil. Inside was a single line, encrypted in Morse code. "Unlock if I disappear." Bella was no longer just investigating an assault. She was unmasking an entire system, where power, race, and silence wove a white shroud over the deaths of dozens of nameless victims. And this time, the darkness would no longer be a place where evil could hide. The rain poured down onto the rusted tin roofs, drumming the entire old lumber yard like a warning drumbeat for a restless night. Bella Lewis stood beneath the shadow of an old willow tree, her frame sleek in earth-toned camouflage, soaked through, but her gaze remained razor-sharp. The clock read 2:43 a.m. Inside the warehouse, the raucous laughter of 5 men echoed chaotically. One held a whiskey bottle, shouting, "I swear, the look on that woman's face when she got cuffed, that was better than any TikTok clip." Another hurled a beer can at the wall, jeering, "Serves her right, walking dogs like they're weapons." They didn't know. Tonight was their last. Bella lightly tapped her earpiece. The signal was live. Ekko, the agile German shepherd, slithered up the back steps like a shadow, taking down the lookout in 2 seconds. One leap, all 4 paws locked around the neck, and Bella rushed in, yanking out the stun baton. A sharp hiss pierced the air. The 50,000-volt jolt arched through his body, dropping him unconscious. The side door burst open. Valor, the larger dog, stormed in like a cyclone, pinning 2 men on the sofa to the floor with 70 kilograms of pure muscle. They thrashed, but Valor's jaws clamped down on the weak points at shoulder and wrist. Not enough to maim, but enough to snap nerves and paralyze them. A third man, wielding a baseball bat, screamed and charged in from another room. Bella spun, using her hip to gain torque, and drove a knee strike into his thigh. A loud crack echoed. His ligament snapped. He howled in agony, collapsed, eyes rolling back. In the smallest meeting room, once the dispatch office for timber deliveries, Silas Brewer stood waiting. The flickering yellow light cast strange shadows, steam rising from the heater in drifting layers. He held a Beretta M9, palms trembling, face ghost white. "You're not a cop," he hissed, sweat dripping onto the tiled floor. "You're just some black woman walking dogs. You think you'll walk away from this?" Bella said nothing. She simply gestured. Ekko lunged from behind the wall, knocking the gun from his hand and slamming him flat. Valor blocked the door, ensuring no one escaped. In a few brief, chaotic minutes, the entire Brewer group was subdued. Bella pulled out the recorder, pressed it against Silas Brewer's mouth. He babbled in panic. "It was Maze! Maze told me to do it. We staged everything. We needed a clash to test the police response system. She was just bait." Bella didn't react. She simply drew out military-grade zip ties, binding every wrist, every ankle. No blood, no bullets. But tonight, justice was delivered without needing a courtroom. Around 4 a.m., Bella drove the Dodge Ram 2500, Silas Brewer's truck, back to the city's main police station. In the back seat were 5 men who once believed they were untouchable. Ekko and Valor sat up front, silent as steel statues. The scene at the station would never be forgotten. Media lights flashed. At least 6 news vans were parked at the gates. A team from Internal Affairs stood ready, having been tipped off by an anonymous email from White Vale. Residents packed the street, including those who once avoided Bella and once looked at her with suspicion. Bella opened the truck door and stepped out, her black coat soaked through with rain. Ekko and Valor flanked her on either side. She said nothing, only nodded slightly to the IA officer and handed over the hard drive containing all the evidence. No applause. But every eye, every light fixed on her was its verdict, its acknowledgement. That night, justice wore no robe and sat behind no bench. It walked through the rain, out of the shadows, flanked by 2 four-legged warriors. That afternoon, the central city square, usually silent like a monument of history, suddenly became the nation's focal point. In front of the cold, gray judicial building, once viewed as a place where things were handled internally, stood a dense crowd of citizens, journalists, activists, and even those who once had no idea who Bella Lewis was. A temporary podium had been set up, above it a loudspeaker, and a glowing red LED sign that read, "Relearn Justice." Officer Ames stepped onto the platform, holding the hard drive containing the confession recorded during the raid. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but a pale blue shirt and a loose tie, a sign that today was no longer about police affairs. It was about the truth. "We will now publicly release a recording from the defendant, Silas Brewer," Ames said, his voice clear, eyes unflinching before the crowd. The audio played, Silas Brewer's voice trembling, soaked in sweat, echoing as if from the bottom of a pit. "I told Mays to cut the footage. I told him to erase the part with the knife. We needed a clash to test the response. She was the test. A show of force. I didn't think she'd react that way. Didn't expect." That voice didn't just silence the crowd. It lifted the weight off the chests of those who had stayed silent for too long. As the recording ended, from the left wing of the building, a loud shout rang out. "Stop right there!" Two internal affairs agents surged toward the side exit, where Mays, a veteran officer with 17 years of service and 4 commendations, was slipping through the crowd. He barely took 2 steps before being slammed to the ground, wrists bound tightly, his face pressed to the pavement. He didn't resist, or perhaps had no reason left to. The live stream, broadcast by a local journalist via the Justice Now platform, drew over 600,000 views within the first 3 hours, quickly trending across the southern and midwestern states. Hashtags # Bella Lewis, # Operation White Veil, and # Justice Unleashed spread like wildfire through a dry forest. And strangely enough, among the hundreds of uniformed personnel surrounding the courthouse that day, not a single officer, not one, stepped up to defend Brewer or Mays. They looked down, glanced away, or unpinned their name tags from their chests, as if to avoid association. Silence, at times, speaks louder than any truth. Bella didn't step up to speak. She stood beneath the birch tree, her eyes shadowed beneath her hat, leading Valor and Ekko away from the crowd chanting her name. When a reporter chased after her, asking, "Do you have anything you'd like to say? Any words for the public?" Bella paused for just a second, then replied softly, "I don't need an apology. I just need no one else to have to stand where I did." A week later, all charges against her were dropped. The court record read, "Procedural violation in arrest, insufficient evidence, misleading reports." No press conference was held, no ceremony to restore her honor. But the community did what the system would not. On the iron gate in front of Bella's home, residents mounted a small oak plaque, engraved with the words, "This is the home of a woman who protected the whole block." In the following 2 weeks, 9 other victims, from teenagers to the elderly, emerged from the shadows. Each shared their own story of intimidation, being coerced into dropping complaints, of nights spent being stalked simply for walking through streets where people of color were not welcome. A federal investigation was launched under the code name Veil 2. 6 officers were suspended, 3 dismissed, including the head of internal security. And at the police station, where a large portrait of Mays once hung under the title Hero of the City, the photo was taken down quietly, without notice. No one spoke. No newspaper reported it. But everyone saw it. The patch of peeled paint left behind, splotchy and raw, like a wordless reminder. Justice exists only when people are willing to face the truth. There were no fireworks. No glittering medal was pinned to Bella Lewis's chest on the first day she returned to her small house at the end of Branchwood Street. But there was a new kind of silence. Not caution, but respect. A kind of quiet only those who've survived the storm truly understand. Within 2 months of the exposure, Bella and O'Reilly co-founded an organization called K9 Justice, with a mission to retrain retired combat dogs to support veterans and victims of community violence. Their first headquarters was established in Springfield, Missouri, inside a repurposed old military warehouse. They started with 4 retired K9s and 3 veterans with PTSD. By the 8th week, the waiting list had surpassed 40 people. Valor and Ekko weren't just dogs. They became the embodiment of resilience. During school workshops, they sat beside children of color, kids who had been discriminated against or bullied for the color of their skin or their family background. Once at a therapy center for orphans, Ekko gently rested his head in the lap of a boy who hadn't spoken for 3 weeks. That very afternoon, the boy spoke his first words. "I believe this dog will never leave me." O'Reilly, who once trembled in the shadow of cruel men, became a keynote speaker for nonprofits and state policy conferences. But she didn't speak to ask for pity. She spoke to demand change. "I didn't survive so you could clap. I survived so you would act," she once said during a hearing before the Saint. Louis City Council. Officer Ames, the first to question his system, was appointed internal advisor, leading an independent investigative team under the police department. Within 3 months, he proposed 17 procedural reforms, including a new clause. All incidents involving trained K9s must be verified by a certified dog trainer before reports are filed. The story of the warrior and the 2 war dogs didn't remain confined to one news article. An independent radio station in Chicago aired the full recording of Silas Brewer's confession as part of a podcast series titled White Veil: The Truth Behind the Curtain. 6 episodes, 42 minutes each, released on all platforms. In just the first week, the series had over 1.2 million downloads. But Bella, as always, declined every interview invitation. CNN, NPR, CBS, none received her nod. Only once, when asked why, she smiled and replied, "The people who need to hear it are living among you, not on a screen." One autumn morning, with dew still clinging to the grass, Bella walked Valor and Ekko down the street. The same road, the same bend, where a nightmare had once been buried. Then, from across the street, a little girl, about 8 years old, raised her hand to wave, cheeks pink from the cold, her hair gently draping her shoulders. Bella raised her hand in return. Not high, not rushed. No need for fanfare, just enough for the little girl to understand. Things can be different. She didn't demand justice. She didn't ask for apologies or permission. She walked straight into the place where justice had been hidden and dragged it into the light. Not with power, but with resolve. Not with but with action. Every morning, as Valor's paws hit the sidewalk and Ekko glides past the wildflowers along the curb, 3 of them keep walking. Not to fight anymore, but to protect what they've reclaimed, step by step, in silence, but never invisibly. Because sometimes the only way to change a system is not to ask its permission. Something has finally begun to change. Join us in sharing meaningful stories by hitting like and subscribing. Don't forget to turn on notifications to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.